Good morning. It's Garland Nixon and Ray McGovern. We got some big things to talk about. Let's talk. Good morning, Brother Ray. A couple of things, some things going on today. Well, one thing, I woke up this morning and found out there's some money that I can't get my hands on due to the SVB bank, but luckily it's not a lot. But at any rate, due to the SVB bank crash. But at any rate, we need to get going. Big stuff. Who would have thought that when Donald Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, that at some point China would slip in the back door and do something that I think is very important, that I think is showing that the multipolar world is here. This is big. China apparently has brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, burying the hatchet, mending the fences. I also read on an Iranian news site that when the president of Iran went to China a month or so ago, that he asked China to intervene. Very interesting stuff. Whether it's true or not, but it was on an Iranian news site, so I think there may have been some truth to it. Your thoughts on this, Ray?
Well, even the New York Times and the Washington Post are making an appropriately big deal of this. Their concern, of course, was, does this leave Israel and the U.S. pretty much all alone in that key area? Well, yeah, that's precisely what it does. Does this mean China, as well as Russia, are getting more and more friends among people of color, people that we consider different from us? Well, yeah, that's what it means. Peter Baker, said this is the topsiest, turviest thing you could imagine in international relations. My God, Now, in the background here, one has to kind of piece together who tells the truth and who doesn't tell the truth. In 2007, as Cheney and his what was the point? And Bush was the guy who was supposed to be president. They decided that they might start a war with Iran or let the Israelis do so on their way out. That is, they were going to ride out into the sunset in another year and leave the mess to whoever succeeded them. Well, what happened was the intelligence community made its last brave stand. Now, let me tell you what happened. That year, an honest intelligence official named Tom Finger from the State Department came in and did a national intelligence estimate. That's the most important genre of intelligence analysis. He shepherded this national intelligence estimate based on new data, based on honest analysts, and their conclusion, released by Congress, actually, who requested it, in November 2007. What did it say? Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. We say this unanimously and with high confidence. Oh, I thought they were working on it. Well, everybody else thought they were. The intelligence community would say, well, we think, 10 years ago, they say, well, we think they'll have a nuclear weapon for 5 years. Then 5 years later, they say, well, we think probably take another 5 years for them to get them. Well, anyhow, this was a bombshell. And Bush, George W. Bush, the younger guy who was working for Cheney, he actually wrote a memoir in which he said, this deprived me of the military option against Iran. How could I justify bombing and missiling a country that the intelligence community says is not working on a nuclear program. Bummer. Okay, so what's my point there? That was 2007. It did. You know, I know a lot about intelligence. I've been too long at it, perhaps. But there is no national intelligence estimate I know of that played a huge role in preventing a god-awful war against Iran. So that's the background here, okay? Now, what was the most recent intelligence threat assessment released less than a week ago? It says Iran is still not working on a nuclear weapon. Okay, so those are the facts. Now, what does this do? This gives Iran and Saudi Arabia a relationship that no one would have thought possible. Why? Well, Chinese diplomacy, Russian diplomacy have something to do with it, but the underlying reason is that the U.S. statesmen, such as they are, think that they're exceptional, think that they can throw their weight around, and that ain't going to work anymore. And this is sort of the last manifestation of fact that the hegemon is pretty much failing, that this unilateral approach to the world has gone kaput. And you know, what more could I say? This was really a bombshell. Even the people who think first and foremost of Israel, namely the pundits in the New York Times and the Washington Post and their neocon allies, are conceding that this is really a setback to Israel, which really lies isolated now, just at a time when it looked like they were going to do the worst to the Palestinians.
Ray, additionally, when we look at it, Saudi Arabia, interesting country. MBS came in, and a lot of people said, "Oh my gosh, he's terrible. He's going to do terrible things." Blah blah blah. Seems to be fairly practical in a lot of ways. When you look at the future, if he's looking forward, he's saying, the economic poles are changing, if not shifting. And there appears to be some new economic players in town. China is now their number one. They sell the most oil to China. They can see that Israel, I don't know if you've been reading about Israel. It's politically and socially unstable. People are in the streets going crazy. Recently, Lloyd Austin visited Israel for meetings. He couldn't leave the airport because protesters had the streets blocked. The Mossad and the Air Force, all of the militaries in the streets. It's unstable. There are people talking about civil war. So if you're and it's a term I like to use a lot, stability. If you're Saudi Arabia, you're looking at the US empire and the Biden people, you're looking at Israel, you're seeing instability. You're looking at China, you're looking at these other countries, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, people are, beating on the door to get in. You're looking, saying, if I want stability, the future's over here. It's not, these people have, the wheels are coming off the cart on the other side. Right.
Well, you're right, Garland. And the reality that they had to furnish a helicopter so that Austin could avoid the crowds, and that he was marooned at that airport. I've been at that airport. It's very big, but it's not a good place to be marooned and to hold high-level talks. So Israel is in more flux than ever before. If I read it right, there are some justice people left in Israel proper, people who don't want to do a pogrom against Palestinians, people who don't want to be a South Africa at its worst with apartheid. And, they are up in arms now. And even Austin said a couple of things about their judiciary that I'm sure the Israelis would not have preferred him to say. So where does that leave us? Well, Israel is not going to depart from the scene or even slide out from the scene without doing the equivalent of the Samson option. And what does that mean? Well, if you know your Bible, he pulled down the pillars rather than, You
Right.
know what the Bible does. So Israel has nuclear weapons. Iran doesn't. Will Israel resort to the worst? I would not rule it out. I would rule it out more that the U.S. would resort to nuclear weapons in Ukraine, for example, or against China. I think the chances of that are even less than the chances that Israel might, for reasons of quote self-preservation, wave the nuclear flag and try to get that to get people to not isolate it so much. And I just don't know. They're in a bad situation, and with the situation in Ukraine the way it is, well, when a major thing happens like this, when 9/11 happened, the Israelis took full advantage of it, marched into Jenin and other parts of the West Bank, and did their worst. So the Ukraine thing being on the front burner, God knows what the Israelis might be prompted to do under the shadow of Ukraine, with attention diverted toward Ukraine rather than toward Israel. I don't think that's likely that they'll resort to nuclear weapons, but of course, in the background, that is always the case, and they have lots of them, hundreds or more, and Iran knows that, and now it's allied with Saudi Arabia. They both give plentiful oil to China. The world is really, as Peter Baker said this morning, it's the topsiest, turviest situation I've ever seen. Well, live with it, man. This is the new world.
Well, one more thing before we move on, and that is Syria, Yemen, because the U.S. has rather skillfully, I hate to admit, played the rode the fractures between Shia and Sunni in the Middle East. And of course, the Yemen, I can't see a couple of things. It appears to me that in order to get this deal, somewhere in there, Iran had to say, yeah, we'll help. And, there are backroom deals that I think have to do with A, ending the Yemen war, B, bringing Syria back into the world with the Arab leaders. I think we saw after the Syrian earthquake, for the first time since the Syrian war started, the Egyptian foreign minister shows up in Damascus. There are a lot of things going on now, and it appears they're back. I would think now, international relations. Would I be wrong in thinking there are additional back deals made, maybe with Yemen and Syria, that accompany this, that we have yet to see, but will be unfolding in the upcoming weeks and months?
Those are good questions, Garland, as usual. I hadn't thought much about Yemen, but you're right. The Iranian role, of course, is paramount there, at least as the U.S. looks at it. And the Saudi role is also very, very influential, given what they're doing. So there's possibility there. I grant you that. And thanks for thinking about that before I did. Now, with respect to what was the other
Yemen,
thing?
Yemen and Syria. As I said, we've seen foreign ministers, we've seen countries from some of the Sunni countries show up and make statements and push back against the U.S., saying we want to continue to hurt the Syrians. There appears to be a wave of sentiment in the Arab world, in the Sunni world, for reunification with Syria. And I feel like these things are there's behind the scenes dealings coming on that's going to address this stuff. Again, further isolating the U.S.'s influence in the region.
And Israel, yeah. Well, on the Syrian thing, it's pure and simple, in my view. U.S. policy toward Syria is simply Israeli policy toward Syria. Keep the Sunni and Shia fighting each other. As one prominent Israeli diplomat told the New York Times bureau chief way back in 2013, she had the presence of mind to ask him, Alon Pincus. He was head of the He was mission head in New York as a top diplomat for Israel. Along, what's your preferred outcome in Syria? And he said, well, Jody, her name was Jody Ruderin, and miracle of miracles, she got this printed in the New York Times, September 6, 2013. Look it up. This is what she reported. Alon Pinker said, well, this doesn't sound nice, Jody, but our preferred outcome is no outcome. Let them hemorrhage this thing. As long as Sunni and Shia are killing each other in Syria, Israel has no real threat from Syria. Whoa. Now, that's the way he explained it then. That's the way they're explaining it now, except not so openly. So what are U.S. troops doing? Are U.S. troops in Syria? Well, yeah, they are. Okay. What are you doing? Have they been invited into Syria? Well, no. What are they doing up there in the north of Syria where more fertile land exists and where all the oil that Syria has doesn't have much, but it has, it depended on a lot of it for its economy. Well, the U.S. is selling off that oil to its allies in Iraq and elsewhere. What? I mean, hello, not invited, selling off their oil, and then they're training terrorists still down there at that little base, El Tanf, in south from near Turkey. So the U.S. is messing around in there. Okay, do the Syrians like it? No. Do their quasi-allies, Iranians, like it? Not at all. Okay, and so this has repercussions for that as well. And when General Austin, when Defense Secretary Austin was just sort of in the general area last week, he was focusing on Ukraine. But, when you're the big guy and you're the head of all the troops and you're in the area, you visit them. So he had the goal to visit his troops illegally in Syria and Iraq. They're sort of quasi-legally in Iraq. So what does it say? It just says that people like Austin are not the sharpest knife in the drawer, that they're so overweeningly hubristic that they think they can make their will work. And now we have, as you say, Saudi Arabia and Iran together. When are they going to learn? Well, maybe they don't want to learn. I mean, after all, Austin is making piles of dough for Raytheon. I mean, it's sort of a comparison with the Israeli approach. As long as Shia and Sunni are at each other's throats, we have nothing to fear from Syria. Well, as long as there's a war going on and Raytheon can pile in the money, what's to worry about? Actually, in another year or two, I'll be back on their board of directors. Now I have a new yacht and a new place in Colorado and one in the Caribbean as well. So venality is part of this thing, but it's mostly what the Germans call Dummheit. People are kind of dumb, and they're blinded by having been raised in an atmosphere that gives them to think that they're exceptional. Well, there's one sense in which they remain exceptional, but they're exceptionally dumb.
I do have to, because this is such a world-changing event. China. The U.S. is, making a lot of bluster towards China. China has come out and, kind of gave the Biden people the finger, saying we're tired of playing. And the U.S. expects China to come out punching. And I felt like this. I think their move is intellectual and diplomatic. That when they say we're sick and tired of this, that doesn't mean they want war. There's a reason that they haven't invaded anybody in 1,000 years or something. And I think this is part of the China plan to retaliate, to expand their diplomatic, to move. I think we're going to see these countries in BRICS. We're going to see new currencies based on commodities, and you had Iran, Russia, and Saudi Arabia together. And you know, the Russian Rosneft CEO from Russia was recently in Venezuela saying, we're going to get Venezuela's oil up and going again. Iran was recently working in Venezuela. It looks like there is a plan, and it's not a plan of military action against the US, but China's at the center of this. Your thoughts on it? Right.
Well, the Chinese have taken the gloves off rhetorically. I think you're quite right, Garland. They have no intention of seizing Taiwan militarily. The Chinese have great patience. I mean, after all, they 4,000 years of history. I mean, they can wait, and they do wait. Meanwhile, they show that when the U.S. dignitaries say, with the Ukraine war, we have really isolated Russia. Oh man, have we isolated Russia? I tell you, we have they're all alone out there. Well, give me a break. I mean, give me a brick. Give me a break. Give me a bricks. You have the lily white West personified by the members of NATO against the rest of the world, for God's sake. Now, Iran, Saudi Arabia, ready to join BRICS. Okay. You have China supporting in a much more full-throated way what Putin is doing in Ukraine. And you have them facing down what the U.S. is trying to do with respect to Taiwan, and that is to make it a big depot for U.S. weapons to be used when, against whom. The Chinese have predominant force in that area, just as the Russians do in Ukraine. So how long will it take? How long will it take for these geniuses, these guys from the best schools, the best and the brightest? Well, in Vietnam, it took a decade. Best and brightest, there's a book written by that. And these were from the same very, very elite schools. They were the same kind of people that couldn't believe that the U.S. couldn't work its will on these barefooted, colored people, you know. I mean, they said it, for God's sake, in some of their secret documents. So it's going to take a comeuppance such as we've just seen yesterday, Friday, with Saudi Arabia and Iran coming together. It's going to take a series of those. But even then, I don't have any real confidence that these elitist people will see the writing on the wall and say, you know, maybe we ought to pull in our horns. Maybe before we get so clearly licked in Ukraine, we ought to see if we can work out some sort of deal before the Russians take over the whole country. Now, just a word of caution here. The Russians don't mean to take over Ukraine, okay? How do I know that? Anybody who looks at the situation knows that the Russians aren't as stupid as Donald Rumsfeld or Dick Cheney in occupying a whole country. They don't want to do that, okay? So when the latest threat assessment says Putin has failed in his attempt to take over all of Ukraine, well, do they really believe? What did he say he wanted to do? He wanted to demilitarize. That means kill as many Ukrainian troops that will fight against Russia as possible. It means denazification. You know, change the government in Kiev so they're not dyed-in-the-wool followers of Stepan Bandura, the Nazi who cooperated with it, his Wehrmacht. So Putin says, look, what I want to do is make sure that you Ukrainians under Western, i.e. NATO or US tutelage, don't keep lobbing shells, killing 14,000, a lot of people, Russian speakers in Donbass, okay? 4 more thousand since the war began. 18,000. Who's shelling those people? The Ukrainian army. Well, right now, with the offensive kind of starting, with Russian forces moving west, we're going to see a situation where the U.S. is going to have to decide, well, maybe we're wrong. Maybe Putin doesn't want to take over all Ukraine. Maybe we could save part of Ukraine. Maybe we can make it, let's make it neutral, what remains, just as we had sort of, well, as the Kiev regime was prepared to do back in late March, early April. We put the kibosh on them. Let's go to the table. Now, if they're smart enough, they'll do that before the Russian army goes up to the Dnieper and maybe farther than that. I don't think they want to do that. But, if they need that to clean out the artillery, to clean out the missilery. I mean, Putin now has said exactly what Lavrov said about 3 months ago, and that is, we just wanted to make sure the people of the Donbass were not shelled, okay? But now, with these longer range missiles and longer range weapons, it's really a matter of geography. You put in weapons that go 100 miles, we're going to have to move our lines 100 miles farther west, okay? It's that simple. Now, will these geniuses in the White House and the State Department get that through their elite skulls? I don't know. If they think they're exceptional, they can make their will work wherever it is, even in Ukraine. Well, they're in for a really painful comeuppance just when the presidential election is going to be going, the process for nomination and the election itself will get into high gear. Biden's going to have to make some really bad decisions, really key decisions. And all indications so far show that he'll still listen to these benighted folks and double down, which could get us involved in something really, really serious like nukes.
Well, one thing for sure, it looks like the economic rug is being pulled out from under him at the same time. Speaking of the brilliant people over at the State Department, and they appear to have come up with a new, very preposterous hoax with Nord Stream. Apparently, 6 people, kind of reminiscent of a Gilligan's Island kind of scenario, got on a sailboat and somehow made their way through the Baltic Sea without being detected and performed a feat of technological sophistication that is almost unimaginable. And we're supposed to believe it. It is kind of embarrassing. Ray, you were in the intelligence community. Can you see when you were in the intelligence community, somebody saying, yeah, that's a good story, let's go with that one?
Well, Garland, as you know better than most, there are 2 CIAs, one that does the assessments, one that does the intelligence reporting on what's really going on in the world. At least that's the way it used to be. And then there are the operators. And when the operators are asked, can you do this? The instinctive response is, yes, sir, of course. Okay. So in this case, they were asked by apparently that brilliant fellow Sullivan, can you blow up the pipeline? They went to all the experts. Yeah, we can do it. Okay. So, but for God's sake, we can keep it secret. We can deny who did it. So be careful, Now that was before the war, before the Russians invaded Ukraine. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that they had this idea that they could do it, and the big mistake is that they told Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State now, and the president, yeah, we can do it, but don't say a word, don't say a word. Well, next thing you know, Victoria Nuland brags, we can, she said, there will, if the Russians invade Ukraine, there won't be much, the Nord Stream won't go through. And Biden says the same thing on, February 7th of last year, in answer to a very talented and gutsy woman reporter from Reuters. She says, but Mr. President, what about Nord Stream? And he says that there will be no Nord Stream if the Russians invade Ukraine. And she says, well, how are you going to do that? Because you don't control the Germans and Russians. I promise you, we can do it. Now, what's my point? My point is that here is Olaf Scholz, okay, Chancellor of the German Republic, the German Federal Republic. Okay, so he's standing right there at the next podium, and she, very, very gutsily, says, "Herr Kanzler, was halten Sie davon?" Mr. Chancellor, what do you think about that? Now, talk about an unwelcome question. I mean, you can see Schultz. Oh, we do everything together. Together, we proceed with our ally, the United States. There's nothing we do that we don't do together. Now, so, Mr. Scholz, did you blow up the pipeline together? That's the question Germans are asking. When you were together there, together with President Biden, did he tell you that you were going to blow up the pipeline? Or did he not? Were you überrascht? Were you surprised that in September when it was blown? Or were you not? Now, there's no good answer that Olaf has to either of those questions. And the problem is so acute that he had to come to Washington one-on-one with Biden. Now, my initial guess about the reason for that very extraordinary visit with the press was allowed to see them for a minute or so. And of course, there were no questions. And Biden, this time, very carefully read from his notes. Anyhow, why? Why did Scholz go there all alone? Well, my initial, and I think I might be quite right, he wanted to say, look, Joe, I'm under a lot of pressure in Germany. They want to know, what did I know about the blowing up of the pipeline and when did I know it? Sounds like a familiar set of questions, right? So, look, you didn't tell me anything on February 7th last year. You got it, Joe? You didn't tell me anything. Okay, good. Now, Joe, you said that your intelligence people had developed an alternative story about how this. Can I see that? And then it comes out this cockamamie thing done by the operators, done by the propaganda people, not the analysts. They probably never even consulted the analysts because the analysts, if they had any soul, they would say, "My God, who the hell's going to believe this?"
Well,
this
so
they went ahead with it.
Let me add this, Ray, real quick.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it, but I know you're right there because, as you know, I'm a former investigator. As soon as I heard as an analyst, as soon as the analyst heard the story, they would analyze it and pick it apart and say it won't work because of this, this, this. As an investigator, if they'd have handed it to me, I'd have read it and I'd have started poking holes in it and say, well, it won't work because of this, this, this. Obviously, they didn't run it by anyone who would have done that. So you're right. It was the PR people. It was the neocons, the Blinkens, et cetera, that just put together any kind of story. And they didn't run it by the people they needed to run by in order to say, yeah, guys, this is, I wouldn't go forward with this if I were you.
Garland, you're quite right, except the reality is even more brutal. They don't give a rat's patootie if the cockamamie story dissolves. It got headlines, right? It served its purpose to deflect from Cy Hirsch's story and from other realities. Now, what's a good example of that technique? In October of 2016, Hillary Clinton and her boys and girls were out to show that Trump's people were having secret talks with Alpha Bank in Moscow. Okay. Now, they said to the technical people, make it up, make sure it's as presentable as possible, and we'll put it out there just a couple of weeks before the election. This will be really good. And the technical people said, my God, all right, how much you going to pay us? All right, we'll do it. Well, they served this thing up with hole in their nose, and they said, this is people are going to look at this and going to be able to see that this cockamamie thing that was all made up, was manufactured, it's false in about 3 days. Hillary Clinton approved that because they all said 3 days, election a week or two away. Man, people will remember the headline. They won't remember the truth. So that's how arrogant, that's how self-satisfied, how benighted these people are. As long as the propaganda works for, even if it's just for a couple of days, and people start arguing about this rather than the reality of Cy Hirsch's story, hey, what's to lose? That's the attitude. It's not the kind of atmosphere that you and I are used to, Garland, but that's what exists today.
How do you think, last thing, I know you got to go in 5 minutes. You've been, you testified at the UNSC, the United Nations Security Council. There's a push there for an investigation. We certainly know the U.S. has a heavy hand at the United Nations. Have you heard anything about that? And how do you think this affects that dynamic? Having a new story? I'll put it like this. I think those who are pushing for it can say, well, what do you know? The United Nations Security Council, it looks like the U.S. has found, and Germany, they've got a sailboat. You know what? Now we know all you got to do is go to them and say, just give us all the stuff you have and we can close this thing out. In a way, I think it kind of helps those who are pushing for it. Your thoughts on the UNSC and the dynamic created by this new pathetic hoax?
Okay, now, Garland, let me ask you a question first. Where do you park your yacht over the winter? Yeah, you have the same kind of yacht I have.
In the Baltic. So one thing for sure, I don't think my little dinghy, as it were, is going to hold 6 divers, much less 2,200 pounds of explosives.
Yeah, well, I don't have a yacht either. But when I think of a yacht, I think of a sailboat. But there are other yachts. There are lots of yachts, so to speak. All right, there are these great big oligarch yachts that could, have lots of passengers and so forth. So just to be clear, I think that cockamamie report talked about yachts and didn't say sailboats. That being said, it's wow. I think as far as the UN Security Council is concerned, the big news out of my testimony before it on the 21st of January, and the other testimony that it heard from Professor Sachs of Columbia, big takeaway there is that Russia was not isolated. The Brazilians had some sort of wishy-washy kind of approach to whether there should be a UN investigation, but the big person was sitting right there to the left of me. He happened to represent 1.4 billion people, and that's a representative from China. Now, he spoke out openly, pretty much saying in some, look, if the UN Security Council is not up to doing an independent investigation about an act of war of this kind, what the hell good are we, right? So that's the reality. Now, if they bring it, they will have to bring it to a vote because it's a resolution. That's what I'm told in any case. So even if the U.S. and France and Britain would veto it, it's going to speak volumes to the rest of the UN, the General Assembly, that China and Russia are together on this thing. And not only that, last thing I'll add here is this. Lavrov yesterday made the point that, if there's no independent, credible investigation of this act of war against Russia, we will have to retaliate. Whoa. I don't know if you caught that, but that's big. We will have to retaliate. I think he said in kind, but I'm not sure about that. Let's just say retaliate. Now, there are myriad ways that various cables, if your internet goes down, there are cables on the Atlantic that may be easily severed in a much more, they're pretty deep, but they could be interfered with. So that's kind of a marker that's set down there. If there's no independent investigation. Now, what has there been so far? I'll just close with this. It's sort of really near Sweden and Denmark. What happened? Well, they waited a couple of days for not the dust to settle, but the carbon monoxide to settle or whatever it is. Then they went down. Deep sea divers. Swedes are really good at this. And they know every inch, every square inch of the bottom of the Baltic Sea in those areas. Okay. So they went down and they did an investigation. Okay. And they come up to the top of the water, and everybody said, "What did you find?" And the Swedish government says, "We can't tell you. It's a secret. We will be endangering national security. We're not going to tell anybody, not even the Swedish people." Now, the day that Jeffrey Sachs and I testified before the UN Security Council, the Danes, the Swedes, and the Germans had circulated a paper saying, "We don't need a Security Council resolution. We're going to look into it ourselves. The three of us, we're going to do a really thorough investigation," right? So that's what a lot of the representatives around the table relied upon. We don't need to do a resolution. Leave it to the Swedes and the Danes and the Germans to do a unbiased, tough investigation of whether the U.S., its ally, blew up that pipeline. Give me a break. That's what it's come down to. And these folks that are running our policy, we told exactly 20 years ago, we told President Bush, you really need to widen your range of advisors beyond those clearly intent on making a war against Iraq, from which the inevitable consequences are likely to be catastrophic, period, end quote. That was February 5th, 2003, the day that Colin Powell spoke. Bush did not widen his circle of advisors, and bedlam broke out in the Middle East and still is there today. Will Biden have the sense to bring some adults into the room that don't just salute, like Bill Burns, the CIA director? Somebody would say, "Hey, Mr. President, do you know where this is going to lead?" Well, that remains to be seen. But we ought to push our representatives, push anyone with any influence to get Biden to listen to somebody else, somebody who's not elite, somebody who's not exceptional, somebody who doesn't think they're a genius. I got to go now. Gordon, right. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And President Xi Jinping and President Putin seem to be meeting soon. I think we're going to need to have another talk soon, Ray, to evaluate the outcome. I think we got some more big announcements are coming. And I'll end up by saying, I think that the retaliation, look, they still provide uranium. They still provide some very, very important commodities to Europe and the US that if they were to cut them off would be devastating. I think they have intellectual ways of retaliating without and economic ways of retaliating without using kinetic means. But we will see. Well, thanks a lot, Ray, and enjoy your weekend, and I will be talking to you soon.
Request permission to go ashore.
Request granted. Cinderella Liberty. You have to be back by midnight.
You take care.
All right. All right. Let me. There we go. That's Ray Mcgovern. And also right now, if anybody wants to do super chats anywhere and have some questions or comments, put them in and I will be happy to answer them, to read them, and we can have a discussion there. Let's continue on a little bit since I got a little bit more time. We got another 15 minutes or so. So here are my thoughts. And Ray made a very, very powerful point, and that is that the Russians have said they're not just going to walk away from this. That if in fact, and that's an issue that has been brought up, that this was in fact an act of war, that the people involved discussed it as an act of war, but not just an act of war against Germany. It was an act of, it was a literal kinetic military attack on the the Russian Federation and in Germany. And so I think the Russians are saying, if Germany won't act, we will. We will act. Now, act does not mean that there will be kinetic action, that there will be war. In the same way, Ray brought up we discussed China, and one of the points that I was making was that China's taking the rhetorical gloves off, that China said, okay, we've tried to get along with you guys in the US and you don't want to, so you want to fight, you're going to get a fight. But that doesn't mean a kinetic war over Taiwan. Think about this. If today is the day that the United States, if this is the week that China has said, let's say March, let's say the beginning of March in 2023 is when the Chinese said, look, we're taking the gloves off, let's have a fight here. Russia began pushing back against the Maidan coup by the US in 2014, and it didn't come to kinetic means until 2022. So that was 6, 7, 8 years. So that means China has a minimum 8 years. China could say, we're going to play with this thing for 8 years. We don't have to act now. We'll have a need to act now. So China has a lot of time. I'm not saying that that is a given time, but China has a lot of time to act otherwise. And they can simply say, look, we're going to let the air out of your tires and see how easy it is for you to drive with no air in your tires. So instead of going head on smashing into you, China says, we're going to go and we're going to create stability in the Middle East where you try to create chaos. Once we create the stability, that we're then going to create an alliance with your both adversaries and ostensible allies in the Middle East, and we're going to take them all. We're going to take them all out of your camp into our camp. Then we're going to create a commodities that's going to go after the dollar. And we're going to yank the rug out of the dollar. Now, we see the SVB Bank, for those who have been watching this, the US's economy, this magical economy that we have, is in a world of deep and serious trouble and might be in free fall right now. So the Chinese may look at it and say, your economy's garbage anyway. It's based on magic. It's based on derivatives. It's based on, asset-backed securities. Those things aren't real. So as your economy starts to unravel on its own, we're going to go over here and we're going to push it over the cliff. We're going to get with Russia, Iran. We're going to get Venezuela's oil back on the market. Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. At that point, who has more oil reserves than those three countries? No one. So we're going to get those three together, along with maybe Brazil, etc. And we're going to have these countries that have a giant basket of commodities, and we're going to create, as your economy unravels, we're going to create a new dynamic economic group, and we're going to create a reserve currency that's based on the commodities that that group has to offer, which means that it's a very strong currency. The US dollar is questionable at times, but people will look at that currency and say, man, that's based on gas, that's based on oil, that's based on real things. That's based on China's industrial capacity. It's based on real solid things. The bottom is not coming out of that. I don't know about you, but I'd like to have my money in that currency rather than the dollar, right? If that currency happens, who here, if you got a savings in a savings account, would you rather have it in the dollar or would you rather have it in that currency? So China may be looking at it and saying, okay, we don't need to go to war with you. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have we'll go to war in the economic realm. And we'll win that war, and we don't have to win the kinetic realm. That's dangerous. We don't want to do that. That's not how we're going to fight you. We're going to fight you in the economic realm. And at the same time they do that, diplomatically, they're building their relationships with other countries. Because think about this. Every time a country, two countries, a region comes over into the Chinese camp, they come out of the US camp, which means the US is isolated. So the US and Israel are now isolated in the Middle East. The US's top ally in the Middle East, if that's the word you want to use, is completely isolated and totally unstable. So China's stabilizing the Middle East, and the only thing that's left there that the U.S. really has as a strong ally is completely unstable and unpredictable. China now can go to Africa and do the same thing. As West Africa starts to kick France out, China can come in and say, look, man, how about we make some deals and we'll maybe even do something, help you to stabilize your economies. And they just start bringing more and more countries into their economic and diplomatic orbit. And as they do that, the U.S. gets more and more isolated. And it's going to be difficult for the U.S. to say, yes, we're going after Taiwan and Ukraine, as the U.S. is tangled up in Ukraine. As the European countries start to fall apart and they become unstable, clearly you got to think that Germany is somewhat unstable or on the edge of instability, because the people in Germany are looking at what has happened to them. They're looking at the difficult times that they're having. They're starting to get in the streets. They're starting to mobilize an anti-war movement, and they're starting to ask questions of their leaders. The country is quickly, very rapidly destabilizing. So the U.S. empire and its colonies are destabilizing. So the Russians don't have to blow up a cable or anything like that. They can simply further destabilize Europe by saying, look, this is over the top. It's clear someone attacked. They can say to Sweden, they can say to NATO, they can say to the EU, it is clear that someone attacked our infrastructure, costing us $11 billion. Unacceptable. So here's what we're going to do. There are some commodities that you absolutely must have, such as food commodities, such as fertilizer commodities. And one of the big ones is uranium. You'll notice one of the things that has not been sanctioned from Russia is uranium. Why? Because the U.S., they're like, I think they provide 40% or something of the uranium in the world. The U.S. has nuclear power plants. They got to have that uranium from Russia. A lot of Europe now, they're going back to nuclear. France is mostly nuclear, right? So they've got nuclear power plants. They got to have uranium. They must have uranium. What happens if Russia says, you blew our power plants? Until Sweden gives us the information about what happened, until we get everything you've got a new story, until you give us the information and allow us to participate, or allow the UNSC to do an unbiased investigation and cooperate with them, you get no uranium. You get no wheat. You get no fertilizer. They cut it off a commodity that is that the Europeans and the Americans must have. They finally go for the jugular and they say, look, guys, you got to have this. I know you got to have it. Up until now, we have not played that game. But up until now, we have not been kinetically attacked. Our infrastructure was attacked. And now you're saying that you don't want to do a reasonable, unbiased investigation? That's unacceptable. We're going to retaliate. So you attacked our gas lines. You attacked our ability to provide you with a commodity. Until you allow an unbiased investigation, allow the UNSC to do an investigation and cooperate with them, you get no, and they pull the rug on something. I think that's more likely. I think that is much more likely to happen, because Russia's not a violent country. Russia's not a country that moves towards kinetic war, as has been said many times. The United States is not afraid of war, so they always pushing for it. Russia understands war. Russia is afraid of war, so they try not to do it. We got a couple. Let's look. We got a couple super chats. So what I'm going to do right now is look at questions that people have. We got some questions, and I'm going to go all the way to the top and find these questions, and we're going to answer them. It looks like we're going to be a while, and so let's answer the questions, because we usually get some really good questions. KB71, thank you. We usually get some great questions, and so we're going to go down and look at it. All right. So good old Sparky says, leaders nowadays can't see the forest for the trees because the education system rewards focus over seeing the big picture. Well, the education system in the U.S. is falling apart. They won't put any money into it. Our schools are old and they teach to the test. That's all they do is teach to the test. Sparky again, smugnerant. Oh, it looks like we got another. Okay. Chicka Boom Boom says the day EU turns against the US will be the beginning of the end for the US empire. It will happen. I agree. I agree. That's what we're looking at. I've said for a while, and I believe that you are correct. What has to happen sooner or later is, and we're starting to see that. We're seeing Hungary. We're seeing some of the countries in the EU, some of the older leaders in the EU saying this is not working for us. And I think the way this thing starts to come unglued for the US is that a number of countries in the EU, as soon as Italy or France or Germany, one of these countries starts to starts to push back, there will be others who will be waiting for that opportunity, and they're not going to have a choice because the people of Europe are going to get furious. And I think that one of the things that is going to happen, thanks to James Warren Bay, I think one of the things that's going to happen is that as a result of Russia's retaliatory moves, because let's face it, they said if there's not an unbiased investigation, they reserve the right to retaliate. There can't be an unbiased investigation. The United States cannot ever allow that to happen. They can't. I mean, let's face it. If you rob the bank, you can never allow an investigation into the bank robbery. So the U.S. can't do that. They have to use maximum pressure. I've said for a while, I believe this. When people write, if we get out of this thing alive some kind of way, when people write history books, they will discuss the Nord Stream attack as a turning point in history, as a solely stupidest act that's been made by any government in a lot of years. And it is an act that they will look at and say, that's what ended it. Because at that point, you created a wedge between the US and its vassals in Europe. You said to the people of Europe clearly, we don't like you. We don't care about you. You mean nothing to us, and we will make you suffer. You exposed yourself. That's what it did. It exposed themselves. Let's traveling Gale great guest, Mr. McGovern. Let's keep going. Chin Lung Tong, thank you. We'll keep going. Linda Wilkinson, thank you. Okay, we might have a question here. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Keeping up, we're all together. All right, the world is mine world. We're going to have some other questions. Charlotte May, we're going to have some other questions. Bob Page. Sparky says, even a novice scuba diver could have told them the yacht story wasn't plausible. And that's a very good point. And that's a discussion point that Ray and I had that I think is of great consequence. I didn't think about it until Ray said it. I did a video the other day where I poked holes in this thing. And I said, wait a minute, as a former investigator, you hand me this story, right? I'm going to start, any attorney will do this. Give them the story, and they're going to say, okay, let's start poking holes in it, because you've got to be, what are you taught in law school? Strategic empathy, right? You have to understand the story from both sides. What is it that your adversary, if you're the defense, you want to know what the prosecution, you want to put together a case for the prosecution. If you're the prosecution, you want to put together a case for the defense. You got to poke holes in it. I'm going to try this. What are they going to attack it with? You've got to be strategic here. And strategic empathy means understanding the other side, right? Well, if somebody decides to go with this story, when they put this story together, what is the intelligent thing to do? To bring some investigators in, to bring some analysts in and say, we've come up with a story here, take a look at it. Well, any investigator or analyst worth their salt, they're going to look at it and say, you got holes in this thing, man, that you could drive a tractor trailer through. I'm sorry, people aren't going to believe it because of this, and this. You're going to have to change these things. Let's come up with a better story than this. Clearly, people like Blinken and Biden and Nuland, the same people who put together this haphazard plan and ran their mouths about it, are the same people clearly who came up with this story and said, let's go with this. But they didn't run it past the people they should run it by. And now, not only have they done this boneheaded thing, not only have they talked about it so much, they've made it clear and obvious that they are the perpetrators. They have now put forth a news story that is even more boneheaded. And now that must be defended. Now, as Ray said, they don't care. They don't in the short run, but I think at some point they would. So you're right. Even a novice would recognize, anyone would look at this story who had any experience in law and say, don't go with this, it ain't going to work. So they didn't run it past anybody like that. What's your thoughts on Iran and Saudi Arabia striking a deal? So let me add on this. There are two factors to this. Ray and I discussed this, but there are two major factors to this. There are how the dynamics in the Middle East, wherein the U.S. and empire and the colonial powers, traditional colonial powers of Europe, for some time have been able to utilize the Shia-Sunni split to their advantage and to the disadvantage of the people in the Middle East. They've been able to use those things to separate the people in the Middle East and beat the crap out of them and steal all their resources. Close that gap, and this dynamic is gone, and they can't use that anymore. The only thing they have, once the Shia and the Sunni come together and say, and I'm going to hit that in a second. Once they come together and say, we're not enemies anymore, we got to kind of look out for each other, then the power of the U.S. and its colonies there start to fall apart. And let me tell you, when this became obvious to the casual observer such as me, when the potential for this rapprochement between the Shia, the Sunni, because do not be misled, the Saudis and the Iranians finding a way for détente is clearly symbolic to the rest of the Middle East for the end of the Sunni-Shia split. When did it become clear? In hindsight, I didn't see it at the time, but now in hindsight, I look back at something I covered and I say, when did it become clear that there was a path forward for the Sunnis and the Shiites to come together and to act on the behalf of the Muslim community at large, the Middle East at large? The recent World Soccer Cup in Qatar. Why? A couple of things happened. One of the things that happened was some Israeli reporters came there, and they were shunned, not by the Shia, not by the Sunnis. They were shunned by everybody. There were Palestinian flags all over the place. It was clear that there was support for the Palestinians and love for the Palestinians and support for the movement for Palestinian freedom and Palestinian rights all throughout the Muslim community. Shia, Sunni, it didn't matter. They were all unified on behalf of the Palestinians. And one of the dynamics that has created that is the Israelis have cracked down on the Palestinians so hard and in such a violent way that it has enraged all of the Muslim community. And I think that's one of the things the extremist government in Israel that is so violently oppressive against the Palestinians has sent a wave of anger and rage throughout the Muslim community at large in the Middle East, and it has unified them on behalf of the Palestinian cause. And that has created that dynamic. Ironically, and paradoxically, the violent crackdown on the Palestinian community in Israel, coupled with the fact that the Palestinians are fighting back, certainly they're not in a position to launch, a military incursion into, into Israel proper, as it were. But they are fighting back. If someone is, believes that their cause is just, they may argue it's a valiant fight or something like that. But the Palestinians are fighting back, however you look at it. And I think that has driven the Shia and the Sunni in the Middle East to abandon their differences on behalf of the Palestinian cause. And it has infuriated them against the United States, seeing that the U.S. has not taken action to mitigate the issues going on in Israel and to address the violence. They've just, kind of like shook their head a little bit and said, we're a little embarrassed about it. Maybe you guys should chill out a little bit, but they really haven't done anything. That's again further infuriated the Muslim community at large. And I think that this is the dynamic that has pushed them in, and I'll put it this way, into the arms of the China, Russia, Eurasian bloc. And I think that is important. And that being said, the Eurasian bloc now is growing exponentially, because to get Saudi Arabia, keep in mind, they've already got Russia in their bloc. Huge exporter of commodities, very, very powerful military, right? To bring Saudi Arabia into their bloc, Saudi Arabia is very, very powerful economically, very, very powerful from a commodity perspective. In that, let's not forget, Saudi Arabia has heavy investments in the U.S., heavy investments in France. So could the U.S. just and France, could the West just punch Saudi Arabia out? No, they couldn't, because Saudi Arabia has a heavy economic investments. They could hurt France in a hurry. They could hurt the U.S. They just say we're yanking all of our money and turning it into yuan. What is the U.S. and France and countries like that going to do? Saudi Arabia has a lot of money invested in Western countries, so they have an economic power dynamic there. So Saudi Arabia, additionally, Russia and Saudi Arabia being together can work on the price of oil, setting the price of oil. They're dragging OPEC around. Russia, OPEC +1, the +1 is Russia. Saudi Arabia and Russia, where they go, the rest of OPEC must follow. What do you think? The UAE and Kuwait are going to say, we're not listening to Saudi Arabia and Russia? No, they're not. Two of the top 3 oil producers in the world. No, they are not. And clearly, I don't know if you know this, recently the Iranians were in Venezuela, and they said, we're going to rebuild some of Venezuela's oil infrastructure. The CEO of Rosneft, which is Russia's oil company, was recently in Venezuela saying, we're going to work with Venezuela to get their oil infrastructure up and running again, right? So clearly, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. They've got a particular kind of very thick oil. You have to have special kinds of things to mix with it. You have to have special kind of refineries to refine it, but they got a lot of it. So I think Iran, you see Iran, Russia, China will be next. These countries are going to go into Venezuela. They're going to redevelop and reinvigorate Venezuela's oil production facilities, bring them back online, and now you're going to have this gigantic, you're going to really have a cartel that controls worldwide oil production and oil prices. And at that point, it's game, set, and match. Let's not forget that Iran has just discovered gigantic gas fields. So you're going to have Iran and Russia, and you've got some of the African countries who have a tremendous amount of gas. So they're going to have a commodity base. They're going to have China, which has about 30, I understand, somewhere around 30% of the world's industrial capacity. At that point, it's game, set, match. They don't have to punch with the United States militarily, because as their economic power grows, they then can say to other countries, join us. Now they go to Africa, they go to South America, they go to the countries that the U.S. has ostracized, and the U.S. has said Cuba and Nicaragua and whatever. Do you know the country with the greatest number of countries? The continent with the greatest number of countries that are sanctioned by the U.S. Africa. So now they go into Africa. So this is a long-term thing. And when I say long-term, I say 5 to 10 years. In 5 to 10 years, they're in a position where the U.S. is, what are they going to do? So I believe that the Eurasian coalition now is on the move economically and diplomatically to isolate the U.S. and to allow the U.S. to isolate themselves. Now, keep in mind, SVB Bank just crashed. The U.S. has got real serious problems. As I said, I got some money I can't touch. It's not a lot. It's not a lot whatsoever. But I want it back, but it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I'll be honest, I like $800-900 that I had that was associated with SVB, right? And I didn't take it out. I'm like, I should grab that and put it in another account. I didn't, right? And I'm like, crap. I may never see that money. I'm looking like, I put it like this, I'm like you, like so many of us, none of us are wealthy. We're just working class people. $800, $900 is, that's a few dollars, you know what I mean, for people like us. And when you look at that, you're like, hey, I wish I'd gotten that money. I might never see it again. Well, if I'm thinking like that, think about how many other people in the United States are looking, saying, that like, I don't have any, like one daughter I have, my kids are grown. What? How many people have kids and stuff they got to feed right now and clothe and things like that? And they're like, hey, I'm afraid of my money. Should I get my money out of bank? We have a real danger of a run on banks. We have people who have larger bank accounts over $100,000 saying, oh no, I got my life savings in this or that bank. And God knows I can't afford to lose that. And for those who don't know, the Federal Deposit Insurance Company, the FDIC, guarantees your money up to 100,000. So people are saying, "Oh my God, I got my life savings and it's over 100,000. I'm afraid I'll lose it." Somebody told me today, I got my life savings in there. The person was a federal employee. They, end up selling a house and move into a smaller home and all this. So they got some money in the account. They've got, their retirement and all this money. And I'm like, holy crap, that's my life savings. I think I need to divide my money and take some out of this bank and put it in two different banks. And that's what people are thinking now in the US, now that a bank has crashed, the 16th largest bank. Take it into account this. But let me add something to you. And I know this because I have a family member who's a CPA who said this once to me. I didn't realize it. Okay, in the United States, we have the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Commission. What they did, that came out during the came out as a result of the crash of 29, when a lot of banks crashed and people got in lines and the bank couldn't give them their money and now they lost everything, right? So they came up with the FDIC to say, look, up to $100,000, your money's insured. Don't worry about it. You don't have to line up at the banks. Makes sense, doesn't it? So people don't have to run on banks. Here's a problem. And I didn't realize that, but a family member of mine, my sister's a CPA, and she said, Carlin, but think about this. That's really a fraud too, for this reason. Okay, $100,000, you got X amount, 10,000, 50, whatever. You got your 100,000 in the bank. What happens if all the banks crash? What happens if everybody's savings goes and we all at the same time, the guy says, I got $1,000. The guy says, I got 99,000. The guy says, I got 100,000, right? But this guy says, I got 40,000. Everybody loses their savings at the same time. Can the federal government cover it? No. So even the FDIC insurance up to $100,000 is really a fake. It's really something to make people believe that if the banks crash, that the federal government can cover their money. But if the banks crash, the federal government can't cover everybody's money. Not even half, not even a quarter, not even 10% of the people in the US. So the reality, if the banks crash, it is 1929 again, because that fraud that the FDIC can cover everybody up to $100,000 becomes exposed. And I didn't realize that until my sister told me. Thanks again for continuing enlightenment. All right. So there's plenty more to talk about. We're going to stick around a while. And right now, we're answering the super chats. At 80 meters depth, there's maybe 4 minutes work time with scuba. The yacht wasn't appropriate to have the winches and gear for deep sea diving suits. Absolutely. It was a sailboat. Did you see pictures of it? It was a sailboat. A sailboat. They had, like, the picture showed 2 bicycles. Literally, I'm not making this up. You can go on Twitter and look it up. They've got a picture of the alleged yacht called the Andromeda. And the Andromeda apparently, let me see if I can find it. The Andromeda apparently is the boat, right? If I can find a picture of it, I will share it with you. Okay, you're going to love this. You're going to love this. I'm going to share this picture with you. You're going to love this. So this is the alleged boat that perpetrated the crime. Now, you will notice one thing about this boat. You notice the 2 bicycles here? There. So I imagine The bicycles were there for a quick getaway. You know what I mean? I mean, come on. After you blow up the Nord Stream pipeline, you got to have a couple bicycles because that allows you to get away quickly, right? So there we go. Investigators reconstruct the course of the sailing yacht Andromeda. The explosive devices for the Nord Stream explosions are said to have been transported on a yacht that was rented out through a charter company under Rugen. According to Spiegel information, BKA officials questioned witnesses on the island. So there you have it. There you have it, right? That, according to them, there you go, right there. That's the Andromeda. That's the one. Now, we're supposed to believe that 6 people got on that sailboat with like 2,000 pounds of high explosives. I guess they had winches to, lower, and cable to lower. They had 4 spots that they blew up. So maybe 500 pounds per spot. They had enough scuba gear and decompression chambers and things of that nature, whatever. They had enough scuba gear to dive 200 for 2 people to dive 240 meters. Then they somehow found a way to drill, weld, chip, cut through the cement outer coating of the pipeline that was cement that was reinforced with rebar. So they chipped the cement away and cut the rebar so they could add the and they used that stinking sailboat. That's the sailboat they used. That's what we're supposed to believe. So I'm telling you, nobody really thought this through. That's all I'm saying. Nobody thought this through. Roder October. All right, thank you very much. Let's keep going. We got questions. Sparky says China puts emphasis on harmony. Let me comment on that. One of the things that China has been doing recently is they've been arguing that the U.S. brings chaos and instability to your region, and we bring harmony. We're looking for ways to bring peace. So now they actually have an opportunity to demonstrate to people, look at what happened in the Middle East. The U.S. has been there for decades. And what have they brought? Murder, war, explosions, separations between the people. We go in there in a couple of friggin' weeks and we fix it. So if you are in a region of the world, who do you want to bring to your region? Us or them? You don't have to answer that question for us. Just look and let your conscience be your guide, as they say. And, my dad used to have a saying about children. He said, children don't listen, they watch and learn, right? People are like, my kid, I don't know why he does that. Yeah, look in the mirror. He's probably doing exactly what you did. My kid's an asshole. Yeah. And you look in the mirror. Garland, do you think there will be a mass conscription in the West? I think that would be disastrous at this point. The leaderships of the Western countries has acted in a manner that is antithetical to harmony. If you want to do a mass conscription, if you want to put everybody in the military, people got to be willing to go in the military, right? What do you need to do that? Let's face it. Let me give you a reminder. The U.S. had a pretty good idea that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor, and they kept their mouths shut. Why? Because they wanted to get in. They kind of really wanted it to happen. They wanted to get in World War II, right? The U.S. in 1991 wanted to go to war with Iraq over Kuwait, and they didn't have a very high support. There wasn't much support. So they then manufactured by support. And a lot of people may remember this. They went out and they cooked up this cockamamie story about the Iraqis throwing babies out of incubators. And they then brought in some actress, and they then went before Congress and they lied. And they said it was a true story that the Iraqis soldiers were in Kuwait and they went in a hospital and they were taking babies out of incubators, throwing them on the floor so they could take the incubator back to Iraq. It was preposterous, absurd. And it was simply the Iraqis are animals, right? The Iraqi soldiers are brutal animals. So, it's terrible, right? Well, They then got support up to 60% and went forward with the war. Why they do that? Because they didn't have the war support. They knew they couldn't go to war without the support. What we have now is support for any type of military action is getting weaker, not stronger. So if the US really wanted to screw up, if Biden really wanted to mess up today, if all he'd have to say is, all right, we're doing a mass conscription, we're going to war, and this country would fall apart. This country would fall apart. A lot of people in this country would say, oh, hell no. So what are you going to do now? Are you going to lock up millions of people who say no? The country would explode in an anti-war movement. You start telling people, I'm taking your sons and daughters and then I'm sending them over here to die somewhere. That's going to be a problem. So no, I'm not going to say they aren't going to try it. I don't think they will, but it would explode into internal uprisings, So I don't think that's going to happen because that would be the results. Good question, though. Excellent question. You have a huge audience in China now. Wow. Well, I'm glad to know that. I'm glad to know I got an audience in China because I'm down with the Chinese people. I love, okay. West hasn't fought World War without Iranian, Venezuelan oil. Good, interesting. Never thought about that. Bottom line is this. I think there is a preposterous and absurd push here to do the Russia thing, to do the Saddam Hussein thing. Now, China's evil and they've got they're doing terrible things. They're mean and they're bad and evil people. That's the game. And I just continue to say, that's the boogeyman game. And I don't play the boogeyman game. I didn't buy, for years. I've been through this for years. I've been through this so many times. 2002, when they were saying we need to attack Iran and Saddam's evil, I said, I don't buy that crap. A pack of lies. And people I have family members, Garland, we've got to deal with Iran. You're being lied to. No. The United States put Saddam Hussein in office. Now they're giving you a bunch of crap about he's evil. Get out of here with that. So, Bin Laden, ISIS is going to get you. Bin Laden, I'm like, Bin Laden is a sock puppet. Get out of here. The U.S. again. Who created Bin Laden? Who trained Bin Laden? We did. So I don't buy I hate Bin Laden. The Al Qaeda's coming to get you. Nope, didn't buy it. 2016. Trump's a Russian bot. He worked for Russia. The same thing. So now Russia's the latest boogeyman. Don't buy it. Now, the CCP is evil. It's China. They keep coming at us with boogeyman after boogeyman and lie after lie. And I am proud to say that not one time in my life has it ever worked on me. I am so proud to say that from Saddam Hussein to ISIS, Al Qaeda, to Russia and Putin, to now China, Communist Party, I am proud to say that it has never worked on me a single time, and it ain't going to. You got some dupes that they may not buy one, but they'll buy another. I'm sorry, none of them works on me ever. And so I say to the people of China, I got nothing against you. Keep doing your thing. If you're happy with the Chinese government, then I'm happy with the Chinese government. And you seem to be doing a very good job of growing your country, growing your economy. I love and respect your culture. I study Zen. I've studied some martial arts, and I think they're awesome. So keep up the good work, China. I got nothing against you. I love you. Love you, the people in China and the people of Taiwan. I got to say to the people of Taiwan, you're being schnookered, man. They're setting you up to get blown to hell. Please don't buy into that. Trust me, it ain't going to work out well for you if you haven't figured that out. Let's go to Harry. Don't you love how they couldn't afford a boat but could afford a ton of TNT, professional diving equipment, and somehow classified blueprints and maritime maps? Isn't that something? That they had to rent a stinking sailboat. Wouldn't you think they'd get a larger boat, a better boat with more power and things like that? How much does it cost to get a ton of TNT and all of the things you need? How do you get all of that? But I guess if you're I don't know, if you're a Ukrainian supporter, you got to just lay it around. It makes no sense. It's so stupid. We're continuing to look because I do want to make sure if there's any super chats. more. Okay, we're going with Jonathan Soul. Garland, if Taiwan elects majority pro-China administration, will that stop U.S. pending proxy war with China? It will make it tough. Good question. Here's what he's saying. The two major parties in Taiwan are the DPP and the KMT, right? And the KMT is the legacy of Chiang Kai-shek's party, the nationalist party that lost a war with China in the late 40s and fled to Taiwan. They are a nationalist party. 'Tis quite true. But the thing about the KMT is they're not stupid. We just put it like that. They do not want a war with China. See, the KMT's argument was never one of independence. The KMT's argument was we are in fact part of China, but we should be the legitimate rulers of China and not the people in Beijing. So that doesn't align with independence. They don't want to be an independent country. They don't argue that they're an independent country. They argue that they are the rightful rulers of China. Therefore, they don't want a war with the country that they want to control. And they don't want to see the United. They don't want to be the cog. They don't want to be the useful tool that drags China into a war with the U.S. that could enter in a nuclear confrontation, and there's nothing left for them to rule. So they're more happy. They're happier with the status quo. They're happier saying, let's let bygones be bygones. You be you, we'll be us, and we'll figure a way in the long run that things will work out and we will once rule China again. But for right now, let's just kind of chill. We don't want the U.S. to come in. Again, something I talked about in the context of Ukraine and why the U.S. globalists align with the Ukrainian Nazis, because the Ukrainian Nazis are globalist Nazis. They're not nationalist Nazis. They're the kind of Nazis that say, we want to control the white race worldwide. That's globalism. The Biden people and the neocons are globalists. They perfectly align. They don't align with nationalists. So therefore, the KMT are nationalists. We believe that in our nation, we don't want to be puppets for the outside. Well, that doesn't align with the globalists. So I believe the direction is going in Taiwan, and I think China's wise enough to see it, that the people of Taiwan are waking up. They're understanding that their government is putting them in jeopardy, and they don't want to be Ukraine of the Pacific. They don't want to be Ukraine 2.0. They want to be Taiwan, and I don't blame them. And they see that the U.S. is stealing TSMC, that the U.S. wants to basically move to TSMC to Arizona and then blow up the original one. And I think they're waking up, and I think the KMT is going to win. Not that I'm a fan of the KMT or the DPP. I'm just saying I think that's what's going to happen. I think China is angling for that to happen, and they want to pull the rug out from under the neocons who want to use Taiwan as Ukraine 2.0. I also think that that's why the neocons are doing so much saber rattling in North Korea, because they see that as their other opportunity to possibly provoke China, and that is via North Korea. And Russia and China are both friends with North Korea. Problem they got is North Korea has nukes. And if they attack North Korea, and if they start to destroy North Korea has already said, we'll use the nukes. So don't screw with us, because we'll use them. If you attack us, we ain't attacking you. You attack us, we will defend ourselves by any means necessary. So it ain't easy for them to go after North Korea. That's the problem they have there. All right, great question, though. Great question. We got great questions here. Here's another one. Wang Yi should get the Nobel Peace Prize. He brought two enemies together with war. Henry Kissinger got his prize by overseeing a war that killed 58,000 U.S. soldiers and millions of Vietnams. And I think it's Qin something or other is the new, it's QIN something is the new foreign minister, but Wang Yi is now moved up to oversee a lot of stuff. So yeah, the bottom line is this. Let me say this. If you look at the diplomatic corps in Russia and in China, Lavrov's people, if you look at the Chinese people, what you see is this: people who have been working in diplomatic circles for their entire career, right? They were trained as diplomats. They carried the coats for a diplomat for years. They watched, they learned, they trained, and now they are professional diplomats. If you look at Tony Blinken, what is his history in diplomacy? None. He worked for Joe Biden. He walked around behind Joe Biden and carried Joe Biden's umbrella in his coat. He was a coat rack for Joe Biden. He followed him around, and when Joe Biden said, "Here, hold my coat and my umbrella," he held his coat and his umbrella. That's what he did. So is he some kind of a genius, some kind of a diplomat? No, he's not. He's a schmuck. He's just a guy who was put in because he's Joe Biden's friend and because he has a neocon alignment with Joe Biden ideologically, but he is incompetent. He is frightfully incompetent and not very bright. I'm not saying he's not intellectual, because to be an intellectual says that I can read a book and I can take the test and I can understand things and maybe pass the bar exam. That doesn't mean that I'm smart. Kamala Harris can pass the bar exam. You know, you can teach to the test, but to be smart, you must be able to. There's a book called Emotional Intelligence, right? That's a good book to read. You must have book smarts, traditional intellect, that will help, but emotional intelligence, understanding how people think, and wisdom, the ability to bring them all together. Tony Blinken got no emotional intelligence and zero wisdom. So can he maybe read a book and take a test? Sure. Can he remember something from history? Sure. But does he have emotional intelligence? Zero. Does he have wisdom? He has anti-wisdom, and it's obvious. So he's going against true diplomats. And now I've said this before. If the Chinese were to have were to go, you know, to say, if someone was to say, well, you know, how did you outfox Tony Blinken in the Middle East? They'd say, because you never send a boy to do a man's job. That's what their answer would be. All right, let's continue. Great questions. We're going on. KMT government is the original government of Taiwan, and seeking reunification with the mainland DPP government is a foreign government. Interesting. I didn't know that. That's one way to look at it. So that, yeah, well, here's the other thing about that. Let me put this another way. The DPP is a quisling government. To me, they're traitors. I mean, this is my opinion. They're traitors. The DPP is a government that says we're going to work for the United. Look at Germany right now. Look at these people. Look at Annalena Baerbock, who absolutely comes out and says, we're going to support Ukraine. I don't care what the voters think. That's a quisling government. They're traitors. They don't work for the people of Germany. To me, that's the DPP. They are not looking out for the best interest of the people of Taiwan. They're saying, we want independence. Really? So what you're saying is, we want to provoke China into blowing us to holy hell. We want our country to just be about a smoked out, blown out pile of rubble with the people all dead, right? No, that's what the United States wants. The people of Taiwan want to survive. They want to live. They want to feed their families. They want to have a life. And the DPP is taking them down the path of destruction. So I would say the DPP is a quisling government. They're not a foreign government. They're a group of traitors that are working for a malign force outside of the country. That's my opinion. People may not agree with me. That's nothing but my opinion. Wow, I got a following in China. Isn't that amazing? All right, next. Dean Jones, thanks a lot. Let's continue. All right, I think that's it. Let's go over to Rockfin. Oh, we got some people at Rockfin. Let's see what people at Rockfin have to say. Babble on. Thanks a lot. What else do we have? We have some people that we get some great questions from Rockfin too. Greg D says, any idea why Russia doesn't bomb the bridges over the Dnieper River? This would isolate Ukrainian troops in the east. Here's the thing about it. I've thought about that's a good question, and I've thought about that all along. I think the reason is because one day they may need them. I think they're simply saying, as long as we don't bomb these bridges, you got to think about the possibility that we'll cross them. If they bomb the bridges and they cut the troops and the military in eastern Ukraine, all from Western Ukraine. Yes, they've isolated them and they can annihilate them, and they make it tough to be resupplied. But everybody's going to say, well, they'll never cross the bridges and they'll never come into Western Ukraine. So we don't have to prepare for that. We don't have to build fortifications. We don't have to have troops. We don't have to worry about them ever crossing into Western Ukraine. As long as they don't blow the bridges into Western Ukraine, then you always have to think, I wonder if they're going to come all the way up and cross and come into Western Ukraine. So that keeps a an option open for them from the strategic perspective. The other thing is this. From the tactical perspective, I think they may need, what if they need them? They may need to. So I think they're leaving that option open so that the U.S. and the Ukrainian military has to consider that they may cross. And the fact of the matter is they may cross. I think they're going to Transnistria. I really do. I think they've got to with everything that's happened. Thanks, Garland, for the great analysis. I'm worried about Seymour Hersh's security with all the unpublished material he is sitting on. Cheers from Canada. I know. See, one of the things you learn is the more, once you come out, they can't touch you. They can't do anything to Seymour Hersh now. Why? Because it would be obvious. If Seymour Hersh turned his key and his car blew up, everybody would know what happened. So Seymour Hersh actually protected himself by letting that information out. Now, if anything happens to Seymour Hersh, everybody's going to be like, hey, we know what you did. I read your article in the Schiller magazine. The LaRouche Party has some sort of bad rap, but everything they say today makes great sense. What's your opinion of the organization? Here's what I'll say. I don't know much about the LaRouche organization per se. I've worked with them on foreign policy issues. I know that they're on the foreign policy issues that I've worked with them on. They were right on the money on all of those. So I don't want to say I have evaluated the organization and all of their beliefs, and I'm against them or I'm for them. I don't know. In the same way that when we had the Rage Against the War Machine, I made the point that, we just got a lot of people here, working class people, normal old regular people who are coming together to say we oppose these neocons and these monsters, right? And that we want peace. And so I don't evaluate, there are libertarians, things I don't agree with. There's things people don't agree with me. There's everybody that's got things I disagree with. So what I do is I don't take time to evaluate the organization. I just say, look, if there's something we can come together on that we agree, great. The Schiller people, the LaRouche organization, when it comes to foreign policy, they've got a lot of great stuff. And I agree with them on a lot of great foreign policy stuff. And that's what I work on them, with them. That's what I will say. Is there Dave Carlin, great interview as always. Thanks, Carlin. Anything else? Scott Johnson, thank you. Is there anything? Wow, we got a lot. That's it. Okay. We got some more people over here with stuff to say. I just saw it pop up a second ago. All right. Chicken Boom Boom, thank you for your insights of Taiwan government. Well, thank you. I think that's it. Wow, very, very interesting. So that's where we are. I think that just about to the end of things. So I think let me just look. I think the big issues that we're looking at this week, the big thing to keep an eye on is that Xi Jinping, the president of China, has won again. Excuse me for yawning. And that very shortly, apparently, he's going to be meeting with President Putin. Something I want to discuss with. I want to comment on that. Things I've been hearing, I want to throw out to you and just run it up. So keep your ear to the ground on this stuff. If you hear anything on it, update me. One thing that was said is that has been said is that okay, and here's the discussion. The discussion of China providing arms to Russia for the Ukraine conflict. I will start by saying this. I think when it comes to military, not necessarily industrial military production, but military technology, I think between Russia and China, Russia is the big brother when it comes to those two militarily, not from production of material, but from technology. I think right now, if you look at what's happening with Russia's technological advancements, they're the big brother to a lot of people, to the world possibly. Nobody has these hypersonic missiles, and they've got the Kinzhal, they've got the various kinds, right? They've got various kinds of hypersonic missiles. They're now starting to equip ships with them. They'll be equipping submarines with them. So they have, we're looking at their abilities when it comes to electronic warfare, when it comes to anti-aircraft, and aerospace protection. The Russians now, when it comes to military technology, are starting to lap some people, as they say. They're starting to really get there. So when it comes to military technology, they don't need help from the Chinese or anybody else. And from the looks of things, they have the ability to industrial, to the industrial capability to create the things they need. So here's my point. I do not in any way, shape, or form believe that the Russians need help militarily from the Chinese. There are areas where they could use more things, but it's not like they can't win with what they have decisively, right? I think one of the things that's going on now is they're fighting the Chinese, fighting the Ukrainians, but they're keeping one hand, if not two hands, behind their back, just in case they get attacked by NATO. They want to be prepared to defend themselves adequately. So they're holding back their might. They're holding back the biggest punch they have in case they would get in order to be able to defend themselves with from NATO, which I don't think they're going to get attacked by NATO, but you never know what can happen in life. And I don't blame them. If I were the Russians, I would be prepared for that. They would be, it would not be reasonable for them not to be prepared for something like that to happen. That being said, I recently have heard that the Chinese have tied the issue of Taiwan of a U.S. Providing weapons to to Taiwan, to them providing weapons to Russia, basically saying, look, you guys are providing weapons to Taiwan. If we want to provide weapons to Russia for Ukraine, we can. You can't tell us what to do, you hypocrites. You can't create a double standard and say we can send weapons to your border, but you can't send weapons to the European border. So I think at this point, China reserves the right to do that should they choose. And I would have to say that my belief, I've felt like this the same way as Alexander McCourse. If they were to provide anything, it would most likely be drones at a very, very, very high level. It'd be a lot of drones. It'd be tons and tons and tons of drones. If they were to give Russia something, Russia could use drones, and they'll win without them, but it would be a lot of drones. But at that point, something would be obvious. There would be a certain level of symbolism there also, because what they would be saying, see, keep in mind something. So what is and I'm taking some of this from McCourse, but I'm adding mine to it because I believe the same thing as Alexander McCourse. That's why I'm a big fan of Alexander McCourse, because I agree with him on so many things. I hear him say things and I'm like, hey, that's exactly what I was thinking, right? And then I hear him say things that I'm like, that's brilliant. I hadn't thought of that. But that being said, I think we're aligned in believing that there's a certain symbolism there. And that is that part of the plan that the Rand Corporation wrote out in 2019, that what's his name? Zbigniew Brzezinski. Part of their plan was an isolated Russia, that we can get Russia, drag them into a fight, and then they will have to use all their might for this fight, their industrial capacity, that'll wear them down and they'll get weaker. But if China starts saying we're going to give them drones, what China's now saying is, you ain't got to worry about that happening. Now, I don't think it's going to happen anyway, but China's saying any prayer that you had, even making that argument, don't try to make it anymore, because they have the country that has more and greater industrial capacity than the EU and the US combined behind them. So anything they need, we got their back. So that plan you had to bleed Russia out over the long term, yeah, well, it wasn't going to work anyway, but now you can't even make the argument anymore. Shut up. At that point, how does NATO deal with that? And what does NATO say now? Because now the US has to say to the European countries, the economy that's keeping you afloat, you gotta let it go. At that point, the US has to call for the immediate and comprehensive economic destruction of the EU. That's their play. That's their play. What is it? 38 to 40% of BMWs and Mercedes are sold in China. They got to say to Mercedes and BMW, forget it. Stop selling them. 38 to 40% gone. How many people get laid off? What happens? How many parts? All the things, the tires, everything that's being sold to go to China is over. Siemens, all these other countries that are doing business in China, over. And I felt at some point, China, if they get pissed at the US, they don't have to take military action. They can say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Effective immediately, nothing will be sold to Amazon. They could pick a company and close it down and say, effective immediately, Amazon, anybody that has anything to do with Amazon or Walmart, anybody that has anything to do with any of those companies, if the US hits China with a big sanction, China could just say, we're closing down Amazon or Walmart. We're closing down Amazon tomorrow, or Amazon and Walmart. You want to play this game? Let's see how it works out. You're going to hurt us, we're going to hurt you worse. Now, what are you coming for next? At that point, if the US economy hasn't collapsed, it is. And what happens now? Now, if they say we're shutting down Amazon tomorrow, Amazon can't buy anything, and everything on Amazon's from China. What are people going to do? They're going to go to other websites to buy the stuff they were buying from Amazon. If you've got an Amazon alternative website, and there's plenty of them out there, you just say, oh, you know what? Guess what? Have you heard that Amazon's closed down? But we got all the same stuff. Buy from us. Boom. And so the Chinese have cards they can play. I'll put it like this. They got cards they can play. Have I missed any more questions? North Korea has hypersonic missiles now. Interesting. They may. Yeah, they may. But one thing for sure, they got nukes. They got nukes. Anything else I want to look? Here's an article, and it's in RT. Let's take a look at it together. I haven't looked at it, but let's take a look at it together. I read a lot. I go through and I read RT, Sputnik, Press TV, Global Times. I read all the mainstream stuff, but I also read the stuff that comes out of the various countries. And that includes Australia. That includes Deutsche Welle. That includes the BBC. I am reading it all as much as I can. Let's look at this together. See what we can make of it. China could outmaneuver U.S. without firing a shot, retired general. The U.S. would be at a disadvantage if it engaged in a direct military confrontation with China over Taiwan. Former Vice Chief of the U.S. Army, Jack Keane. Now, I remember Jack Keane. I know, in fact, I know his wife too. Because I used to, for those of you who don't know, I used to be on Fox News for many, many years. And I was on all the shows regularly. I was on Tucker Carlson. I was on, you name it. I was on all of them. I was a regular on all the Fox News shows. I was with them for 10 years, upwards of 10 years, around 10 years. And I used to see Jack Keane almost every day in the green room, and his wife. I'd see her regularly. I talked to her. I knew her well. She wasn't his wife at that time. And so let's see what he says. Now, he's a very, very hawkish guy, so it's interesting that it would come from him. Extremely hawkish. China possesses more ships, more airplanes, more offensive and defensive, blah, blah, blah. He said, retired general protector, that Beijing would likely opt for a different strategy where it would attempt to bring Taiwan under control by imposing a total blockade. Yes, I mean, everybody knows that. Not saying it would. The retired general argued that China could prevail without firing a shot. They would need to establish control over Taiwan's airspace as well as sea lanes. Now, here's what makes sense. The U.S. would well be advised to beef up its deterrence capability in the region to prevent a war. In other words, he's saying spend more money in the military-industrial complex. That makes sense because he used to be on the board of directors for General Dynamics when I knew him. So there's no doubt that this guy is involved in military-industrial complex. Another important task for the U.S. is to ensure that regional powers such as Australia, South Korea, Japan, blah, blah, are on board just in case. So the bottom line is, bottom line is, what this clown's saying is, you got to spend more money on the military-industrial complex, which makes sense because he is involved in the military-industrial complex. So he's looking to get paid. Anything else we need to look at? I think that's it. I think that's it. All right, gang. Well, thank you very much. Let's see, is there anything else with the super chat? Okay. Chicken Boom Boom says China's arming some of their cargo ships with missiles. Oh, look, China's loading up. They are loading for bear. China does not want a confrontation, but they're wise enough to know, that if there is one, they're going to be loaded for bear. So if there was a confrontation, I think that China would be in a position to knock the crap out of the U.S. in a hurry. Here's why I think that. Look, what are we really looking at here? Rockfin, anybody that I missed? What we're looking at is, and here's the problem the U.S. has. Let me get comfortable so I can talk about this a little bit. That made me think. The U.S. now has a problem. They've been able to project their power, but they projected their power on weaker countries, right? They send these ships, they send all this stuff out over to some tiny country like Libya, and they blow them out of the water. So they project their power. They go up to the border of a country that's unable to protect itself, and they blow the smithereens out of them. Now they're talking about projecting their power to the borders of other superpowers. You're going to go to Russia's border and fight them? That's why I say this was always doomed in Ukraine. You're going to go to the border of a superpower and fight them on their border. You're losing that battle. Superpowers are very, very good at defending their borders. First and foremost, they can fire missiles and weapons from inside of their air protected airspace, and Russia doesn't have any lines of support. Everything is there. You're on the border of Russia. How hard is it for them to get weapons and ammunition to their troops? Their troops are on their border. And now you're saying I've got to project my ships out to the border of China, 6,000 miles away. And then I got to keep resupplying them. What happens if they fire missiles the first day and run out of missiles? I got to get more missiles to them. But what happens if China has submarines that are able to interrupt your supply routes? So you got more ships and missiles coming, and they're able to blow them up. They're able to hurt what happens if you're running out of stuff and you need more supplies? But your supply route is 6,000 miles long all the way back to the U.S. or how many, 5,000, 4,000, it doesn't matter. It's a lot of thousands of miles long. You got to get your stuff, project your power out all the way to the border of China and Russia. You're not in the long run, in the short run, you're going to get the snot knocked out of you because they're firing an unlimited amount of missiles. Wave after wave after wave of missiles are coming at you. You can get the crap knocked out of you on day one. Then what do you do? So, yeah, I'm with you. That's the bottom line. I think that's it. All right, gang. Well, thank you very much. I will end by saying this. Thank you very much. If you got any money in the SVB bank, you're out of luck. How's that? Additionally, if you need to use it to get money, a couple of things. Follow me on Telegram. Follow me on Twitter at Garland Nixon. I'm on Instagram, Garland.Nixon, Facebook, plain old Garland Nixon. If you can help the channel, PayPal is a great way to do it. PayPal, there's my information. You've got buymeacoffee.com. That's great. At Garland NH. I don't know why they stuck an H at the end, but buy me a coffee. And that will allow you also, if you want to do a monthly contribution on Buy Me a Coffee, just like PayPal, you can do that now. And my what is it? $ DC Radio Man is my cash app. If you're going to want to help the channel, that's highly appreciated. Last but not least, Rockfin, ROKFIN, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. I am there just in case they throw me off of YouTube. That is my alternative platform. People all have them. They got, what is it? Rumble and Odyssey and all that. I chose Rockfin. It's a great platform. It doesn't have any advertisements, costs nothing to join. So follow me on Rockfin if you don't like watching advertisements and things of that nature. Rockfin's great. And additionally, you say, well, how do they stay in, in business if they don't charge any advertisements? Or you can become, if you choose, you can become a subscriber. It's $14.99 a month, but they give you a couple months free. So it's like $12 a month or something like that if you join for a year. And subscribers, I do a show every Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. with Scott Ritter. That is my subscriber only show. But, if you can do that, fine. If not, then just make sure you keep keep your money for, if you can't afford it, keep your money for you, yourself, and your family. Certainly appreciate everybody who does what they can for the channel. I do the best I can. I have a lot of fun. I enjoy interacting with everybody. It's Saturday here, so you guys have a great day. That's right. It's clocks go up, right? Clocks spring forward today. So it's daylight savings time. Thanks a lot, everybody. Peace. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. I'm out.